Hi, I'm Murphy. This is my channel, Murphy's Every Whim. It's afternoon, as almost always when I'm recording. It's a very warm day. HWC is golfing in the heat, but he said he didn't know how long he would last. He's already ridden his bike 25 miles today, and so he's done a lot. He may walk in at any moment, done with golf. But I'm here to talk today about a book haul, and this book haul was done back in March, about the time of spring break for me. I had traveled with HWC to Alabama and Texas, and while he was at a golf tournament in Texas, of course, I went to a used bookstore. And I'm just now getting to talking about this because I've recently gotten, first of all, relatively recently, started going back out into the world after COVID. I isolated myself a lot and for a long time. But the other thing is that I also have started getting back into the joy of reading paper books instead of listening to books. And so I've done a lot of book shopping at thrift stores. I don't buy new books. I don't buy new paper books. If I buy a new book, a brand new book, it's either an Audible book or on Kindle. And so I want to read other things besides new books. I think there's a lot of good stuff out there that's been published. I also, with the onset of the use of AI in helping writers compose and to actually write some books, the books in the past, we know they were written without AI. So I think about that and find that attractive. So I've done a lot of book shopping. I have quite a backlog of book hauls sitting over here to my right that I need to get through. And so I want to talk about this one today. Today, this was in March. Again, this was the third week of March. I went to Buda, Texas, which is just south of Houston. I've never actually been in Houston, and since I've only been to Buda and now Kyle, which are both south of Houston, I don't know if I can say, south of Austin. I don't know if I said Austin before or Houston, but we're talking about Austin, Texas. Austin, Texas, Buda, Kyle. I don't know whether I can say I've been to Austin yet or not. So, while I was in Buda, I looked around for bookstores, and of course there's probably some great ones in Austin, but there's a lot of construction on the interstate between where I was and the center of Austin, and I didn't want to go through that. So I looked elsewhere, and I found that in Kyle, Texas, the Kyle Library has its own thrift store. And so, of course, a library's thrift store is going to have books. So I drove down there, and they have a nice little section of books in the bookstore. In the thrift store. It's a good-sized section for a thrift store, but probably smaller than what you might expect in a used bookstore. But it was good. So another thing the books that I selected sort of give you an idea of what parts of bookstores I look at when I go in. So the first one is Alcatraz, The True End of the Line by Darwin Coon. And this is a memoir. And Darwin Coon was a convicted bank robber who spent 4 years in prison at Alcatraz. And I got this because of my morbid curiosity, my morbid fascination with historical prisons, with Alcatraz itself. I've gone to visit Alcatraz. I've tried to read historical pieces about Alcatraz. And so this book, this memoir, satisfies that, some of that morbid curiosity, morbid fascination. I don't know why we like to read about crime, and I don't know. I haven't investigated that for myself. All the President's Men by Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward. And I've read this before, I believe, but this nonfiction account of investigative journalism has a complex enough story that I could probably read it 2 or 3 times and still not quite get it all. Even though I was alive during this era, I was young and sheltered and I really didn't know what was going on. I did know when I first went to Washington, D.C. on a school trip when I was in college, we were near the Watergate apartments. And I can't remember if the Watergate apartments or some other Watergate building is where the National Democratic office was, but that's about as much as I knew about that at the time that I first went to DC. So I want to read that again. So that was the nonfiction sort of biography area, but I spend more time in the nonfiction than in the memoirs and biographies. It's just that this was such a small place, I saw those 2 books. A couple of plays, because I like to read drama, Our Town, Thornton Wilder, and this book actually, so this is the Kyle Library Thrift Store, but because it's a thrift store and the library, some of the books were pulled from the library and some books had been donated. So this is a book that was donated because it has a half-price books label on it. But Our Town was set in the early 20th century, and I feel like it might give me an idea of how my parents and grandparents idolized, how their ideal idea of a small town was. So I thought that, and I mean, it's a classic, I should read it. Another play that I'd never heard of, and this is Painting Churches. And this is a story of a woman who paints and her relationship with her aging parents. And so that intrigued me. But it's also, when it came out, not sure, I think it was in the 60s. When it came out, it was on the short list for a Pulitzer Prize. So I'm just sort of surprised that something that was on the short list for the Pulitzer Prize that was well known at the time that it came out is something I'd never heard of before. But I also like the idea of a play about relationships, about a family. And so that was in the drama, poetry section. I didn't find any poetry that I wanted. In the novels section, I ran across Bee Season by Myla Goldberg, or Myla Goldberg, I'm not sure. So the bee of Bee Season in this book is referring to, the bee in Bee Season in this book refers to a spelling bee. And this girl, presumably pictured on the front, is preparing for a spelling bee, and it's a story of the relationship between her and her parents during this process. And so I noticed when I got both of those books that they had similar stories. So I probably will read them close to each other so I can compare them. Havana Bay by Martin Cruz Smith. And Martin Cruz Smith wrote the Arcady Rinko books, most popularly probably Gorky Park, but I've read most of those. I didn't know about this one. I don't think I've gone and made a list of which Arcady Rinko books I've read and to see which ones I'm missing. But there's also I read somewhere a little controversy about how the U.S. is depicted in this book. So I'm curious to see what that is. I'm not afraid to read something that's probably controversial. So this is a sort of thriller detective book that I like. I particularly like Martin Cruz Smith. I like the character Arcady Rinko. A book I got because of the cover and the name. It's Peter Ackroyd's Hawksmoor, and this is a historical novel, and it's a detective novel, and it's set in London in doesn't say exactly when, but historical detective. It's usually something I'll try to pick up, but if you watched my previous video about reading The Darwin Affair set in Victorian London, I probably will be critical of how the history is presented in this book. It's just my area, sorry, not my area of expertise, that's not what I meant to say, sort of the area that I feel like I know a lot about, and I probably don't know as much as I think, but I have expectations of how I think that history should be presented. Then they had a separate science fiction area, and I got this book, The Judgment of Eve by Edgar Pangborn, and when I saw this cover, my first thought was they were judging Eve, especially the fact that she's bare from the waist up, but actually she's judging them. It's a post-apocalyptic story. There was a one-day war, and these three men are come to have, they each have their own pros and cons, and she's judging them. Mostly I got this because of the cover. I feel it's very familiar. I don't think I've read this book. I can't remember reading anything by Edgar Pangborn. This is a particular sci-fi series that says sci-fi rediscovery, and so maybe I'm familiar with that cover. This is number 18 in that series of books, or maybe I don't think it was in my parents' bookstore, used bookstore, because sci-fi did not stay in my parents' bookstore. If it was sci-fi, either my brother or I snatched it up, or a customer snatched it up. So things did not stay there unless they were, like multiple copies of the same science fiction book. But maybe he had it. Maybe I saw it in passing in the store. Maybe I've seen books from that series. I don't know, but it's interesting. It makes me feel like it might be something like Herland or The Female Man, but it's written by a man. So I really am curious to know what this book is, if it's an action book or if it's really more philosophical. We'll see. And then probably a book that should have been in the section on novels, but I think I put it with Pangborn because it's a classic, and that's Alexandre Dumas' The Three Musketeers. I've read Dumas' The Man in the Iron Mask, and multiple times have read The Count of Monte Cristo, and I really would like to read this. Alexandre Dumas actually is a pulp writer. He wrote for money, and he had a team of writers writing for him. So it's not clear if of the books he published, if he actually wrote them or he just directed somebody writing them. So in a way, he's like Patterson in that way, that his name, Alexandre Dumas' name, is on a lot of books that he probably didn't write. And I don't know about this book in particular, whether he wrote it or it was part of his crew writing it. But, you know, Three Musketeers is a big part of our culture, and I'd like to read the original. Although I know from experience it takes a long time to read Dumas, and this book is, it's only 443 pages. But I remember when I read The Man in the Iron Mask, it took a long time. I read it while I was on a trip to Costa Rica for a couple of weeks, and even though I had a lot of time for reading in Costa Rica, I did not finish it while I was there. So it takes a long time. All right, so that was Kyle, Texas, the Kyle Library Thrift Store. If you're in the area and you're looking for books, it's worth a gander. And it's possible that we might travel back to Buda, Texas sometime in the future, and I'll probably go back there. And I'll probably do a little more research to see what other bookstores I can see. So thanks for listening to me talk about why I've chosen these books and sort of a clue to how I navigate a used bookstore, what sections I gravitate towards. And I enjoyed talking about this. Tell me what you think, and I will see you next time. Take care.